Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. Headline number one this week. Oh my gosh, it's been political violence and threat week, it seems like, in the Valley pre-election. You had a Tempe teacher who was arrested for threatening Donald Trump Jr. via text message, a suspicious white powder that was sent to Kari Lake's campaign office, which thankfully turned out to not be dangerous. And then you had that 60-year-old guy who was arrested by Tempe police for shooting 3 times the Tempe Democratic National Committee's office. He was picked up after hanging razor blade lined bags containing a white powder from several homemade anti-democratic signs in Ahwatukee. Headline number two former presidents in the Valley this week. Bill Clinton campaigning for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump campaigning for Donald Trump. And headline number 3, a lot of polls to sort through as we head into the final days of the 2024 election season. In a new poll of more than 1,400 Arizona voters, Marist has former President Trump with a 50 to 49% lead over Kamala Harris. And in the U.S. Senate race, Marist has Democrat Ruben Gallego leading Republican Kari Lake 53 to 45%. And that brings me to my guest on the AZ Political Podcast. It's Paul Bentz.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. He's the Senior Vice President of Research and Strategy at Arizona political firm HighGround. Paul was named Best Pollster in Arizona by the Arizona Capital Times 3 times. And just last year, HighGround was named Best Polling Firm by the Times. So let's talk about your poll, because I just mentioned the Marist poll. Last month, you guys showed that former President Trump had a 2-point deficit to Kamala Harris, and that Democrat Ruben Gallego had an 11-point lead over Kari Lake. There's been some movement, though, and it's in the positive for the Republicans.
That's right. We've seen a trending for Trump in particular over actually 3 surveys. He started off about 3 points behind when Harris was new in the race. About a month ago, he was about 2 points down. In our latest survey, he's up, in fact, by 0.6 of a point. Still well within the margin of error, but We're talking about every time we've gone out in the field, he's done progressively better, and it definitely shows some Republican enthusiasm going into 2 weeks from the election.
Is that how you'd explain it? Because I know a lot of people who are they're like, this is no way in shape or form or what the candidates are trying to do right now, at least the presidential candidates, is persuade anybody to vote for them. What they're doing is they're activating the people that are going to vote for them to make sure they show up.
Well, I think that's part of it, is activating their own base, getting them excited to show up, but it's also suppressing their opponent. I think the attacks on Harris seem to be working. The negativity, particularly around immigration, seems to be pretty effective. About a month ago, we had almost 14 points of crossover vote of Republicans saying they were voting for Harris. It's fallen to about 7. It's cut in half. And that's why we now see the former president with a narrow lead, is because Republicans are coming home to him and starting to support him. We also see that he's eroded a little bit of Harris's base among Democrats. We'd seen 90+% of Democrats for Harris. Really, I had said that they'd circled the wagons, and that seemed to be the case. But really, we've seen the crossover vote for Trump from Democrats go from about 2 points to about 7. And so he's really gained in both audiences, really sort of suppressing her support. Yeah.
What's interesting is that Marist poll showed that, as you look back at 2020, Joe Biden won 24% of the Latino vote in Arizona. He won Arizona's Latino vote by 24 points. And Trump's got the lead when it comes to Latino voters in Arizona this go around.
Well, they've certainly made a concerted effort to improve among several categories, including Latino voters. It seems like a lot of what they're doing is working, but I don't know if it's necessarily that they're getting these folks really to vote for Trump or really getting them to vote against Harris. Harris, a largely unknown quantity, vice president for a fairly unpopular president. And so they've been definitely taking advantage of that.
All right, let's talk about Ruben Gallego, who, as I mentioned, last time you guys were out in the field polling, had an 11% lead over Kari Lake, and now that's cut to, what, 9.5?
Yeah, 9 points, basically. Okay. And I don't think it will be that large of a lead. It's a pretty sizable lead. As we see with all elections, they generally get closer the closer we get. It'll narrow some. At this same point, 2 years ago, we had Mark Kelly with about a 3-point lead over Blake Masters, and he ended up winning by 125,000 votes. So I suspect what we're seeing is it's a pretty sizable margin right now. I don't know if it will be 9 points, but Gallego is in a very much more advantageous position than, say, the presidential race right now.
Yeah, and he's definitely in a much more monetarily advantageous position than Kari Lake. I mean, you can't, walk by anywhere without seeing a Ruben Gallego ad.
It's pretty unbelievable. When your opponent decries the amount of money you've spent in your race during a debate, that shows you do have the financial advantage. She made a clear point about pointing out how much money he's spending and that he could have used that money in some other way. Meanwhile, there are outside groups going after Gallego, attacking him and trying to tie him to the Biden administration. It doesn't seem to be working as well as it is at the top of the ticket. For whatever reason, I mean, Gallego's from a progressive-leaning district. He has a pretty progressive voting record. As Lake said, it's the, extreme home makeover edition. There is a little bit of that going on, but it's not sticking to him because he did a really good job early on framing himself, talking about his upbringing, his blue-collar roots, his veteran service. I think a lot of that has really sort of inoculated him against that, whereas Lake has not spent the time to give people a reason to vote for her. She spent most of her time attacking Gallego.
And attacking Gallego for doing an extreme makeover, which is maybe something that she should have considered for herself.
She certainly should have changed tax. The thing is, insanity is defined by doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. She's basically took her gubernatorial playbook from 2 years ago that didn't win and is trying to run it back. And it seems to be even less successful this time. She never really reintroduced herself to the voters. She had a chance to really come out and explain who she was and maybe get a little bit of distance from Trump. She seems to be coming even closer to Trump and trying to be even more like him. And there's only one Trump. That nobody else really can to replicate that. Nobody wants, as she calls herself, a Trump in a dress. Nobody wants that. They want something a little bit different. Trump is his own unique animal. Everybody else is sort of just a cheap imitation.
Is that how you explain that? That there is that deficit between Donald Trump's popularity in Arizona and Kari Lake's? Is it because there is only one Trump and you're trying to mimic somebody that already exists?
Well, Trump's getting more Republican support. I think Lake is suffering a little bit from her flip-flop on some of the abortion issues following the Supreme Court decision and sort of the fallout of that. She was called out at a couple meetings. I don't think she's been as successful in appealing to those Republican crossover voters after telling McCain folks to get the heck out and using the other phrase. I also think
you can say hell on.
Oh, hey, okay. There you go. She told him to get the hell out, and I think McCain Republicans took that seriously. But her biggest challenge is among independents. Trump is much more competitive among these independent voters. Someone called them a la carte voters, and I think that's a very apt description. I think as they look at this race, they're not attracted to what Lake is offering at this point. They're much more susceptible to Trump. We saw in 2016, independents went Trump's way. In 2020, they lean more towards Biden. We're seeing independents in Arizona. They don't like the MAGA Republicans. For whatever reason, Trump's the exception. They like Trump okay, but the MAGA folks, they don't seem to really be getting behind, and I think that's one of her biggest problems.
You used that term when you were on Arizona's Morning News with me and Jamie West earlier this week, a la carte voters, and you really drove it home by pointing out that not only are people not voting straight Republican ticket when it comes to candidates, they're not doing it when it comes to, ballot issues either.
That's right. I mean, we did some polling and we found that the abortion initiative is passing with almost 59% of the vote. And at the same time, Prop 314, the immigration initiative, is passing with 58% of the vote. That means that there are abortion immigration voters out there. And to take it a step further, that means that there is a Trump Gallego abortion immigration voter out there. That's so ultimately Arizona. It speaks to definitely our independent spirit.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the issues because, that's what drives the campaigns is talking about those issues. The issues of the economy and immigration and the border, those are still the two top issues?
Absolutely. I think immigration has really shot up because we're talking about it so much.
Yeah.
And Republicans have been very effective in pointing it out and trying to blame almost everything. Whatever the problem is, immigration's the culprit, whether it's housing or crime or anything else. And they seem to be pretty effective on it. Democrats have tried to push back, talking about, well, we tried to pass a bill and you're the ones who killed it. to mild success. I don't think they've been as effective on that topic as they probably could have been. The economy, certainly, as high prices continue, I think people are concerned about that. It's a big issue in the 50 to 64-year-old range. By the way, those are Gen Xers now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a little scary to when you think about that. The same people that...
Gen X, man.
Well, if I say 20 years ago, a lot of people, 20 years ago, 1980. No, 20 years ago was 2000. And so people go, oh my gosh.
Yeah, right.
So when you say it from that perspective, the 50 to 64-year-olds are a lot of the Gen Xers, further in their career, looking towards retirement, likely to have kids in school, paying a lot of bills. They seem to be most acutely aware of some of these economic concerns. They're the most likely ones to be wanting to downsize and seeing interest rates that don't allow them to downsize, those golden handcuffs, as it were, they're calling them, where people can't leave the house because they simply can't afford to buy a different one. I think they're the ones that really feel it. They're leaning Republican by a significant clip and have been for quite a while. They're also much more pessimistic about the direction of the state and the direction of the country. And I think that's what's leading them to vote for the Republicans.
So you might not only have Trump Gallego pro-abortion measure, pro-border measure voters, you might have Clash and Ramones fans who are voting for Trump.
That's right.
Okay.
Maybe,
full Gen X.
Maybe saw Nirvana in a small club.
You throw it all in
right.
there. Yeah.
And part of the interesting thing, though, is we've seen a shift in 65 and older. So our seniors, we have a lot of retirement communities from Sun City to Sun City Grand to Pebble Creek to Sun Lakes to Leisure World. And they used to be very reliably Republican. You used to go out to those retirement communities, just talk to those folks, and you'd win. And they were largely why Arizona's a red state. They're actually leaning towards Harris and towards Gallego right now. So there's a little bit more discernment in the 65 and older, and they've been replaced by this 50 to 64. So it's not, people say, oh, Arizona, it's the old folks, they vote Republican. Well, in fact, our retirees are a little bit more split, and it's this next segment that's really making a big difference. Younger voters, the 39 and under, the 29 and under are still very much Democratic leaning, but we are seeing some cracks in the Democratic wall in that 30 to 39 segment as well.
Interesting. As you look at other polling information from other swing states, are you seeing this going on in other places as well, or is it just an Arizona phenomenon?
I think it's going to be close. We're seeing trending towards the Republicans in North Carolina. I just heard on KTAR, in fact, about how Pennsylvania is not even allowed to open their ballots and count them until actual election day.
Right.
So Pennsylvania will likely be very close, and we won't probably know how that one turns out. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty going into the election, and I don't think we're going to know who won on election night.
Yeah, and I think it's going to drive some people crazy. And then in turn, they're going to drive us crazy because they're going to be like, why aren't you telling us who won?
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the other races. And I'll be honest, I only took a look at the top line of your latest poll. How's that Schweikert Shaw race going to end up? I mean, it's obviously going to be very thin. Do you see that seat flipping in Congress to the Democrats?
That's probably one of the most competitive races in the country right now. And I haven't seen any recent data on it. I will say that there is more Democratic enthusiasm in that area than we're seeing in some other parts of the state, but still behind what we've seen in the past. In fact, what we're seeing with early ballot returns right now is a slight underperformance from Democrats compared to where they were. They still have high turnout, but they were overperforming by large numbers in the last two cycles that they're not able to replicate right now. We saw Schweikert was narrow winner last time by a couple thousand votes.
Yeah.
And so that's why everybody thinks it's really vulnerable. But in this case, it will really come down to who shows up and who returns those ballots. If they're unable to get sort of that extreme Democratic enthusiasm, I think Schweikert might be able to hold on to the seat. Also, I mean, talk about turning on the TV and seeing a bunch of ads. I'm talking to voters in that district. They're getting 30 pieces of mail a day.
Oh.
I mean, crazy number of mail, and a lot of anti-Shaw, which I think will have a similar effect to what we're seeing with the anti-Harris mail.
I live in that district. My wife picked up the mail on Friday, didn't pick it up again until Sunday morning. So there might have actually been 2 days of delivery because they're delivering the mail late at night now because they have to.
Right.
And we had 40 plus pieces of mail, and more than half of it was campaign stuff.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
It's insane. It really is.
Well, I'm talking to a couple of campaigns that stopped mailing in some of the swing districts because, they're going to do what? One mailer, maybe two. The volume, they're not going to be seen. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly heard people talking about that, which is sort of unheard of because mail is still, I know people hate it. It is still the most effective way to talk to a voter. We see it in poll after poll. Before you talk to a voter and get a gauge, and then after you mail them, you can see a change in awareness. You can see a change in opinion. So mail still works even if people only look at it on the way to the garbage can. Mm-hmm. But I think we've reached the saturation point in mail at this point.
And then the other really competitive congressional race, we'll wrap up with this. It's mostly in southern Arizona, but it does kind of come up and kiss into Pinal County. Juan Ciscomani and Kristen Engel. That's a close race too, right?
Absolutely. That one's been a traditionally close race. The legacy district that was a very similar area was the one that Gabby Giffords used to represent.
Right.
And it would go Republican in the midterm year and go Democratic in the presidential year, and it would go back and forth that way. Yeah. So it's got that pedigree of that. And then you add in the fact that in that northern part that you're talking about that includes part of Pinal County, you have LD 17, which is suddenly a very competitive state legislative race as well, with a couple of Democratic candidates that have raised a lot of money. So that one's one to watch. Everything that I've seen shows that it's very, very close. If it ends up being a Republican year and Republicans are over participating, I think we could see Ciscomani and Schweikert hold on to the seats. But again, these are ones I don't know if we'll know on election night because they're going to be really tight.
Wow. Well, thanks, Paul.
Of course.
Paul Bentz, once again from HighGround, Arizona. I'll just call it an historical political firm in Arizona. He's one of the great pollsters in our state, and the best thing to do is just tell everybody, get out and vote, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the best thing you can do is vote. Here's a secret. October 29th is the last recommended day to mail your ballot. The sooner you mail your ballot, the sooner they'll leave you alone. The sooner the text will stop, the sooner the mail will stop, because campaigns take you off the list once they know that you voted. We don't know how you voted, but we do know that you voted, and we'll leave you alone. So that's a little secret, a little tip.
Yeah. So vote and don't send in any white powder. Okay, let's just say that right now. I'm Jim Sharpe. Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.